The Philadelphia Eagles are going to need to go through the NFL draft to replace Milton Williams and Josh Sweat. I'll tell you who they should take coming up on Mock Draft Monday right here on Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louis DiBiase. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's right, you guys heard it in the intro. It is for the first time in 2025, for the first time in almost a year. It's Mock Draft Monday right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. The NFL Scouting Combine is going down this week in Indianapolis. Lots of draft talk, going to be getting into prospects all throughout the week. Free agency is less than 3 weeks away. I mean, the offseason's here. That's the thing about winning a Super Bowl and, consistently having deep playoff runs is the offseason comes up quick. Like, there isn't the grace period there is when you lose in the first round at Tampa Bay or you don't make the playoffs at all. For the Eagles winning a championship, it's you get like a week and a half to celebrate, and then it's right back into it, at least for me on the podcast. And so I enjoyed all the Super Bowl recap shows, but it's time to talk draft. It's time to talk free agency. Today I'm going to do my 7-round mock draft, and this is going to be from the perspective of the Eagles before they have gone through free agency, through the draft, through their own in-house decisions. This is what Howie Roseman should do and what I think he would do if the state of the team was exactly what it is right now, before he brings in any free agents, and what he assumes will happen with his own in-house free agents: Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, Zack Baun, Isaiah Rodgers, Mekhi Becton, Kenneth Gainwell, Brandon Graham. So that's what I'm going to go through on today's edition of the podcast. And let's start with the first overall pick. And let me just say this before I get into my first two picks, because they do have a theme. The Eagles are going to need to use this draft to replenish talent for 2025, more so than free agency. I'm in the process of creating my offseason simulation podcast for the show, where I play the role of Howie Roseman. I go through in-house free agent decisions, unrestricted free agency, going through the draft, going through any sort of trades I would make, going through the whole offseason as if I was the Eagles GM. And I was looking at free agency, not in-house, but what other teams have to offer you in the open pool. It's not a good class. Like, the draft is kind of weak in certain areas. You could say it's more of a meat and potatoes draft, but that's good for the Eagles. When it comes to free agency, it's pretty bad. So I would say, even though, yes, a lot of these picks, these needs might be filled through free agency, through decisions Howie makes before the draft, I actually do think most of our mock drafts before April will stick. Like, I don't think it's going to change all that much after free agency, because if the Eagles want to replenish their defensive line, if they want to add to their linebacking core, to the offensive line, I think they're going to have better options, not just in the long term, but even in the short term through this draft than through free agency. Because yes, this draft is a little bit weaker, I would say, at like wide receiver. It's definitely weaker at quarterback. Is it 2022 where it's Kenny Pickett and my guy Malik Willis? No, but it's certainly not the quarterback class of last year or the last few seasons. I think it's a little bit weaker as well at running back. Like, it's the skill positions outside of tight end, it doesn't look great. I don't love it for the secondary either. But for what the Eagles need this year, the meat and potatoes, offensive linemen, both interior tackles as well, for the defensive line as well, pass rushers on the outside and on the inside, it's a good draft for that. And the Eagles, I really do think, are going to get back to what they do 99% of the time in the draft, and it's draft linemen. They finally gave me my year where they took a cornerback in the first 2 rounds, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Needless to say, I think it worked out pretty well in year 1, 2 of the greatest rookie seasons we've seen in Eagles history, both Rookie of the Year finalists. Now, all right, go back to what you do. Build from the trenches, especially considering you've got free agents there. And I don't think, like, maybe you keep 1 or 2 of the 3. I think there's a good chance, or of the 4, there's a good chance you don't keep any of them when we're talking about Mekhi Becton. Brandon Graham's going to retire. Josh Sweat and Milton Williams. There might be a chance you don't have any of them. And that's the scenario that I went with for this mock draft. It was, let's say Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, and Brandon Graham are all gone. Yes, you still have Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt. You still have Jalen Carter, Moro Ijoma, and Jordan Davis on the inside. You still have 5 core pieces, but you got to have more. You want to be 3-4 deep on the edge. You want to be 4-5 deep on the interior. And that's where I focused the first 2 picks. I did not trade. I did not make any sort of moves in this mock draft. I was sticking and picking. And here's what I went with the 32nd overall pick. And I'm so glad this guy fell. I think he'll be in that 20 to 32 range. It's Ole Miss defensive tackle Walter Nolen. I think Walter Nolen is the perfect first pick for mock draft season, mock draft Monday 2025. Walter Nolen is the perfect replacement for Milton Williams. Like, he is that, if you want that pass rushing specialist that can take advantage of one-on-ones, take advantage of mismatches next to Jalen Carter. Maybe he's not a finished product, but you're going for the ceiling. What I like about Howie Roseman's draft classes the last few years, it's less about just production like it was in the Joe Douglas era of 2017 to 2019, 2020. It's more about upside now. And if they're going to continue to stick with that theme, Walter Nolen is the guy. Like, I think he is the perfect replacement for Milton Williams. Is he going to be who Milton was last year as a rookie? Probably not, but I think he has that ceiling, if not higher. Like, he is a pass rush specialist. He's athletic. He's explosive with his rushing skills. He has violent hands. He's got good power. He's twitchy. He's bendy. Like, he is a guy that maybe isn't the best 3-down run defender, but that's what you have Jalen Carter for. That's what you have. And I'm not saying he's bad at it, but no, he's not Jordan Davis. He's that perfect rotational piece with Moro Ijoma. Like, Jordan Davis is going to be your 2-down run-stopping nose that hopefully continues to develop off of the momentum he has from the playoffs in the pass rush category with 2 big-time sacks in the NFC title in the Super Bowl. But odds are Moro Ijoma is the guy right now that's going to replace Milton Williams snaps. Most of them, at least, in 2025. Get somebody to split that time, run a nice 1-2 punch next to Jalen Carter, with Jordan Davis being in the middle there from a snap count perspective, maybe actually below them like he was Ijoma last year. I think Walter Nolen can be that guy. And I actually saw somebody during the Senior Bowl, because Nolen had a really good week down in Mobile, Alabama. Somebody said, I believe it was Matt Miller or Todd McShay, one of the draft guys, said, do not let the Philadelphia Eagles get their hands on Walter Nolen, because they know, like, this is the kind of player the Eagles like. And he's a little bit of a riskier pick. Some teams might not think he's worth a top 15 selection, a top 25 pick, and then boom, he falls in the range of Howie Roseman's ability to probably either trade up or just sit there and get him. And I think odds are you'd probably have to trade up to go get Walter Nolen within the top 25, inside the top 25, I'd say. Probably have to move up like 7 to 10 spots. But at the same time, I could see him falling to 32. Last year, I didn't think there was any chance in hell Quinyon Mitchell fell outside the top 15, and he fell right into the Eagles' lap outside the top 20. So I think there's a chance that he's available here at the end of day one, and if he's there, yeah, I like a lot of the edge rushers that could be available too. But I think Walter Nolen, again, is the perfect replacement for Milton Williams to go next to Jalen Carter and to continue a really nice 4-man rotation of Carter, Davis, Ijoma, and Nolen. So I think that's a good first pick for Mock Draft Monday in 2025. My second pick in the 2025 first Mock Draft Monday of Locked On Eagles, I'm sticking with the same school. The Eagles like to go Alabama. They like to double dip at Georgia. I'm going to go to A.J. Brown's alma mater, Ole Miss, and take a second defensive lineman. It's Princely Umanmielen. Princely is another traits guy that I think you can add to the rotation of Jalix Hunt, Nolan Smith. Again, we'll see what happens with Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham. I think more likely than not, both of those guys are going to be gone. You bring in a free agent, like let's say a Malcolm Kuntz, like a tier 2 edge rushing free agent, and then Princely Umanmielen as that third and fourth guy in the rotation. Boom. I love it. Is it young and an experienced defensive line? Yeah, absolutely. Like, that's rare for Howie to be going that young on the defensive line, but I like sticking with the theme of the defense having young, top, first, second round draft picks with a ton of upside traits guys that you can get star-like production from in their first rookie deal while being inexpensive as you continue to pay the offense. And so if they lose Josh Sweat and Milton Williams, like I think they will, and Brandon Graham to retirement, you have to replenish your defensive line. They want to be 3-4 deep on the edge. They want to be 4-5 deep. Vic Fangio definitely does. On the interior, maybe even 6 guys. I think 2 players, if you're going to stick with upside, go with Walter Nolen at pick 32. And if he's there at pick 64, Princely Uman-Milan, who's long, he's a strider, right? I think he needs to get better with his short area explosiveness, that first step. But he has speed, he's got bend, he's got a really good wingspan. Like, he is a guy that has a lot of traits that you can develop. Like, if you want a guy that's this year's, I'm not going to say he's Jared Verse, a rookie of the year, but if you're going to go for more of a ceiling guy than a floor guy, go to Ole Miss on the defensive line. Those are 2 guys that I like a lot, and I thought both looked good in Mobile. All right, so those are my first 2 picks for Mock Draft Monday. Walter Nolen, the defensive tackle out of Ole Miss, and then another Ole Miss pass rusher on the edge, Princely Uman-Milan. We'll continue Mock Draft Monday coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles, rounds 3 through 7. This episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, you never feel like you missed your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you pay, you get paid instantly. I should say when you win. Right now, new FanDuel customers, you get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, we continue on the first episode of Mock Draft Monday for the 2025 offseason right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. The theme of today, meat and potatoes. Howie Roseman needs to replenish his defensive line. Even if he keeps Josh Sweat or Milton Williams, the likelihood of him keeping both, I think it's actually 0%. I just don't think there's any way they can afford both of those guys on the open market, considering Milton Williams is going to command like $20+ million a year. Josh Sweat, after the Super Bowl he had, not should have been, but outside of Jalen Hurts, like non-quarterback, if there was a Super Bowl MVP for a non-quarterback, which would be a cool idea, by the way, because it's a quarterback award, just admit it. They should do one for other positions too. It would have been Josh Sweat. Like, he was dominant against the Chiefs. He's going to get, I don't know if it's 20 a year, but it's close. Like, it's 15 to 20 annually. So there's just no way you're doing that when you have the highest paid offense in football. Eventually, you're going to pay Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, and all these other young studs like Quinyon Mitchell eventually and Cooper DeJean. I just can't see it happening. So I went to the well. The strength of this draft is the line on both sides. I took 2 Ole Miss guys back-to-back from an SEC school. No, it's not Georgia or Alabama. It's Ole Miss. I took defensive tackle Walter Nolen with the 32nd overall pick, and then at pick 64, I took Ole Miss edge rusher Princely Uman-Milan. So then, that's a fun young 7 guys on your defensive line. Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, Princely Uman-Milan on the edge, another free agent that you bring in. At defensive tackle, you got Jalen Carter with Jordan Davis, Moro Ijoma, and Walter Nolen. That's a lot of upside. That's a lot of talent that I'd be excited to watch next year, to watch Vic Fangio and Clint Hurt develop. That's an exciting group. But I do want to get to the offense for this third-round pick and focus on another position that's very deep in this class, and it's tight end. Do the Eagles need to... I see this a lot right now, and it's an obvious, easy talking point. Dallas Goedert is around the same age, actually older than Zack Ertz when they drafted Dallas Goedert with their first pick after they won a Super Bowl. It's the perfect connection. It's literally the same thing. They pick 32. They need a backup tight end, a long-term replacement probably to Dallas Goedert. Goedert gets hurt a lot. like, tell me if you heard this before. You've heard it on this podcast and every damn article that has to do with the tight end position and what the Eagles should do in the draft. So, yes, it does make sense to go tight end, and I'm going to take one with this pick, but not because I think the Eagles need to replace Dallas Goedert. Like, yes, he's older now than what Ertz was when in 2018 they selected Goedert in the second round. But let's remember, the Eagles didn't draft Dallas Goedert in 2018 with that second round pick to replace Zach Ertz. They took him because, well, number one, they thought their roster was pretty set after winning a championship. They were going to run it back, and they thought their core was pretty locked up. It was kind of a luxury pick where they said, we have an opportunity to add yet another weapon for Carson Wentz, and it was more so Nick Foles at the end of the year that used Goddard. We have an opportunity to add more weapons to an offense that we already feel like is loaded with them. I think that was the main part, is now we have an 11 personnel package with Nelson Aguilar we can use, a 12 personnel package with both Ertz and Dallas Goedert, and yes, by the end of his rookie deal, we can then evaluate who's the better player. Is Goddard, who's younger, going to surpass our elite tight end in Zach Ertz? But Zach Ertz, to this day, is still a good tight end. We saw it in the NFC Championship game. If they never drafted Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz would still be in Philly, and he'd still be a good player. So, yes, Dallas Goedert has a much more extensive injury history than Zach Ertz does. And I do think they need to draft somebody for that reason, so when he's out, they still have a viable pass-catching tight end. But I don't think, I'm not trying to push Dallas Goedert out the door. I want to extend Dallas Goedert. I think he's got a lot of ball left in him. Yeah, he's going to play 12 to 14 games a year and miss, 3 to 5 games every single year. Absolutely. But it's worth it. He's still a top 3 tight end on the planet, in my opinion, when he's healthy. And so it's worth missing a few games. I'm drafting a tight end because I want a more pass-friendly 12 personnel package in those condensed formations. I want that second guy that can catch the ball. And because Dallas Goedert misses normally a month a year, I want to have that player so when Goddard's out, there is not a significant drop-off at that position. I thought Grant Calcaterra developed really well this year, but you definitely want to upgrade that spot. And then, yes, maybe by the end of this rookie's deal, maybe he's better than Dallas Goedert, and you just do the same thing you did with Ertz and Goddard, and you replace Dallas with this pick. But maybe not. Dallas Goedert's still a young player in his prime. I'm not trying to push him out the door. But I do think round 3, it makes a lot of sense here, and it's a really good class. I don't know if this guy's going to be available. He's probably more of a second-round pick, but you never know because, again, it's a deep class. I'm going with Miami tight end Elijah Arroyo. Maybe he's Dallas Goedert's long-term replacement, even if he's not, for a round 3 player. To combine Dallas Goedert and a 6'4" athletic player like Arroyo, who's really good over the middle of the field, that's a pick I really like. So then, again, if Goedert goes down, you've got a really good tight end still on the field, and when they're out there together in 12 personnel, a defense can't just say, oh, we know you're going to run the ball because Jack Stahl's out there, or, oh no, Grant Calcaterra is here. This is another player that can be a mismatch against a linebacker or a smaller defensive back. Arroyo, especially when a play breaks down, is really good at finding the soft spots of zone over the middle of the field. And the Eagles need to get better throwing over the middle this year. How can they do that? Add a 6'4" tight end like Elijah Arroyo. I think that's a really good idea. And then hopefully he is the long-term replacement. But if not, I think this is a really good pick. It's a luxury pick, sure, but it just adds to your arsenal on offense. Now Jalen Hurts has Devontae, AJ, Goddard, and Saquon, but you also have Jahan Dotson and Elijah Arroyo are your 5th and 6th options on offense. Get out of here with that. And if you're going to throw the football more this year, which I think they will, it'd be nice to have another pass catcher. And Arroyo is a guy that I think would make a lot of sense. I like that pick. I don't know if he'll be there at, 96 overall, but maybe he is. Maybe you trade up at the top of the 3rd round or back into the 2nd round, but I think he's a player that makes a lot of sense. And with one of those 3 picks, maybe it's the first pick, maybe you trade down from 32 like you did in 2018, and you take a tight end in the 2nd round or the 3rd round. Whatever you do, with one of those first 3 picks, I would like it to be a tight end. And then my last picks in round 4 and 5, I went with at round 4, pick 129, a offensive line depth piece, Miles Frazier, a big right guard. I kind of like sticking with the theme of what you had with Mekhi Becton a bigger, oversized guard that's more powerful than athletic, but guards are normally smaller than Miles Frazier, than Mekhi Becton, but after seeing what Becton did last year, I want to have that mauler in the run game at right guard. And Frazier's a guy that has some, positional versatility. He can play tackle as well, good length. Stoutland University needs more students, especially if Becton's gone. Get, Tyler Steen some competition. If you bring back Fred Johnson, even if you don't, you might need another swing player on the offensive line to bring in. I think Miles Frazier has some traits that Stoutland can develop. I mean, he's been proven to develop pretty much everybody. And then with my final 3 picks, round 5, pick 162, I went with a Kenneth Gainwell replacement. Yeah, Will Shipley will probably be RB2, but I want to add some power to the backfield behind Saquon. I went with South Carolina running back Raheem Sanders, a guy, again, that plays. He's a one-cut, get-up-the-field kind of guy, but he's somebody that can break tackles, a red zone, I think, threat, just a bigger player. And I think I would kind of like to have that kind of body in the Eagles' backfield. And then the final pick, I should say, round 5, pick 166, California cornerback Noel Williams can play inside and out. A guy that had a nose for turnovers at Cal, like he was a ball hawk. Interceptions was his strength. If Avonte Maddox is gone, you might need another slot backup to Cooper DeJean. Who knows what the plan is with Coop? I think they're going to keep him inside and not play him on the boundary, but you're going to lose Avonte Maddox. You might lose Isaiah Rodgers and Darius Slay. We'll see what they do with both of those guys. Rodgers is a free agent. They could move off Slay, even though he has 1 year left in his deal. I think adding some more cornerback depth in this draft makes sense, so my final pick was California cornerback Noel Williams. Let me know what you think of that 6-pick first mock draft Monday of the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'll post that mock for you on our X page and our YouTube communities page at Locked On Birds after the show. So let me know what you think of that. Coming up next, we'll wrap up this Monday edition of Locked On Eagles, getting into the linebacker position. Howie Roseman, what Zack Baun did this year could convince him one of two things, and they're the complete opposite things. I'll tell you what they are coming up right here on Locked On Eagles. All right, so you guys know I've made it very clear the last few shows. There's not a lot Howie can do this year that would make me upset. Like, I would love to trade for Myles Garrett. Of course I would. Who wouldn't? If they don't do that, am I going to be upset? No. I would love to keep Milton Williams next to Jalen Carter. If they don't do it, am I going to be upset? Not really. I'd love to keep Josh Sweat and Mekhi Becton somehow. If they don't, am I going to be upset? No, not really. There isn't really anything Howie can do this year that would make me mad. Although he's done it before. He's surprised me, so who knows? Unless he takes a quarterback in the second round again. I doubt that happens, but just don't take Jackson Dart with the 64th pick. But there is one thing that would frustrate me, that would actually get me fired up. It's if Howie lets Zack Baun walk. And it's not all in his control. Zack Baun is a UFA. He's a first-team All-Pro linebacker. There might be a team that just makes him an offer that he can't refuse, and a responsible GM just can't match. I doubt that's going to be the case, though. I don't think people are going to think what Zack Baun did this year was a fluke, but I don't think he's getting Fred Warner money, right? Like, I don't think he's going to reset the market at linebacker. So I think the Eagles will be able to afford his next deal. Like, they should be in play if they want to be in on it. It's all about if they want to do it. And that's what I'm so curious about with Howie Roseman. I think he could think one of two things based on what Baun did this year, and they're the complete opposite. He could see what Zack Baun did, how well he played. For the first time at this position as an inside linebacker, when Howie signed him, he thought he was going to be an edge piece, a rotational edge piece. Vic Fangio said, nope, this is a middle linebacker, boom, first-team All-Pro. Howie could see that and say, I've done it before, I can do it again. I did it with TJ Edwards. I found this undrafted rookie that ended up being like the spine of my defense for years, the green dot play caller. I let him go. Yeah, I took 1 year that I sucked at linebacker, but I found another one of those guys in Zack Baun. Like, I can find these inexpensive linebackers, especially now with Vic Fangio as my defensive coordinator. I can give him another value player that costs a lot less than Zack Baun, save that money, maybe try to focus more on Milton Williams or Josh Sweat or another free agent and bring them back and let Zack Baun go. I've done it before. I can do it again. I have Nakobe Dean still. Eventually, he's going to be back from that injury. Maybe he wants to pay Nakobe Dean. He's going to say to himself, I'm not paying 2 linebackers extensions. So it's one or the other. Dean's going to be cheaper. I'm going to keep my draft pick. He could say that. I think there's a real possibility that Howie Roseman does that. I'm just trying to prepare you for that scenario because Howie Roseman's entire career, that's who he's been. So would it surprise me if he does what he always does, even considering the season Baun had? No, it actually wouldn't. Because he might think, hey, I have to go cheaper at some positions more than others. And if I want a shot at keeping some of these linemen or players at more important positions, as good as Zack Baun is, I got to let him go and I got to try to replace him. And I've done it before. I can do it again. He did it with Nigel Bradham too. Like Bradham wasn't this, big name free agent that cashed in a massive deal back in 2016. So he's done it a lot throughout his career. That could be one thing he thinks of. Or, and this is what I hope, he sees how the changing of his philosophies are paying off. He finally paid a running back last year in Saquon Barkley, and look what happened. He won a Super Bowl because of it. He got a first-team linebacker. Although he didn't pay a guy like that or draft a first-round linebacker, he got a first-team All-Pro linebacker on his football team last year, and it's one of the main reasons they won a championship. He can see that. He can see how beneficial, I should say. I'm filling out my forms for work, so forgive me. He saw what drafting DBs early could do for his team, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Maybe he's going to continue that trend of going one way when he normally goes the other, zigging when he zags most of the time, and he's up with the times now. Linebackers are so much more important than they've been in years past, right? And maybe he pays Zack Baun. That's what I hope. I hope he sees the benefit of having an elite linebacker. He sees that the market probably won't be as lucrative as we might think. Again, I don't think Zack Baun's going to reset this position's contract value. I don't think he gets Fred Warner money. And he's also got to know that while Nakobe Dean did have a great year in 2024, this leg injury is going to seep into the 2025 season. And I don't know when Dean's going to be back. It's probably the second half of the season. Maybe it's closer to playoff time. We'll see. But this was a serious injury in the playoffs. So I hope he doesn't think I'm just going to go find my next, cheap linebacker. Because then the Eagles might be in a scenario, I hope he learns from 2022 where he saw TJ Edwards and Kazir White walk out the door. And then they were in so much peril at linebacker in 2023, and it's a main reason for the collapse on the field. He's throwing out Zach Cunningham on the field, and Nakobe Dean just wasn't who he was in 2024 and 2023. He's throwing out next to him Shaq Leonard and Zach Cunningham. It just was not good enough. So I hope he learns from those mistakes, and he's very good at that. He's very good at learning from his own mistakes. He sees that. He sees how the changing of his philosophies are helping, and maybe stick to that idea this year, and he pays Zack Baun. That's the one move he has to do this year. I just do not think they can go into next season without Baun and Dean. If next year's starting linebacking core is Jeremiah Trotter Jr. and Oren Burks, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be happy with that. Learn from what happened in 2023 and pay Zack Baun. Yeah, I believe Howie can probably find another pretty solid linebacker for cheap, but it's not like he's always done this. He did it with Bradham and Edwards and, sure, Kazir White and, Zack Baun, so he's done it 4 times. But you know what? He also signed Devin White, and Devin White was terrible. He signed Shaq Leonard, and Shaq Leonard was terrible. He brought in Eric Wilson, and Eric Wilson sucked. There's been a lot of linebackers that Howie Roseman, who's the one dude from Denver years ago? Corey Nelson, I believe was his name? Awful. Just not the guy. There's been a lot of linebackers Howie's gone in on, and they're just brutal. So this doesn't always work. I don't want to go back to the days of Nate Geary. Sorry. So that's the one move that's going to get me really fired up. I don't know, though. That's also the move, though, that it's very unpredictable. I have a feeling, a good idea of what's going to happen with the other free agents, what Howie's going to do with the rest of them. But with Baun, he could think one of two ways. It's either, I've done it before, I can do it again, I'm sticking with this strategy of cheap linebackers, or he says, I've learned from my mistakes, we need Zack Baun, Nakobe Dean's out for a while, I'm going to continue this trend of changing my core philosophy of roster building, and he pays a linebacker for the first time in a long time. We'll see. I have no idea where he's going to go with it, but that's the one thing that will make me pissed off on this show is this offseason if Zack Baun is not wearing midnight green in 2025. We'll see what happens. We got a lot more coverage of it, though, leading up to free agency. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, if you liked Mock Draft Monday right here on Locked On Eagles, make sure you check out as your second listen of the day, the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. Daily shows we're turning out on draft content. Combine week is here. We got you covered. We're going to be your first listen and hopefully your second right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Louis DiBiase signing off. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.